Hello everybody, Steve Farmer here bringing you Week 9 coverage of the 2013 U.S. Chess League. This is a matchup between the Arizona Scorpions and the Seattle Sluggers. Now both Seattle and Arizona have a slim chance to make it to the playoffs. Whoever wins this match might be able to make it in if LA loses to San Francisco. Now LA is firmly in second place and San Francisco is in first. Now, San Francisco may put in a B team, which would give LA a good chance to win because we saw how B teams performed from our last week's matchup. So, it's slim to none that both of these teams here have a chance. But first things first, you must win this match. Our first matchup here is a tough one for Mackenzie Molnar, who's playing white for Arizona. He's going up against Gariev, and Gariev, I believe, is the highest rated member of the Chess League this year. And if we look at the website, indeed, Timur is rated 2768. He is above Vorozhin Akobian and Yelishvili. This is going to be a tough matchup for Mac. We're going to get through the opening rather quickly here. Now, this is a Halloween special for you guys, and I'm going to have some scary chess and other scary moments pop up in this video. However, the opening is not a big concern because we want to get through the theoretical part, which is going to be heavy for both of these players. Alright, now Bishop e7 is a new move played by Timur. Previously, Bishop to b4 has been seen, and this is mostly a weapon of Doltov. He's played it a few times, but okay, Bishop e7 seems logical enough. And now knight to b3 was played. I thought knight e4 would be an interesting try, but knight to b3. Now white is not really down a pawn in this line. That pawn on d4 can be taken at any time, but white's not in any hurry to take it. Now I think Timur should play rook to c8. He didn't. He played d6. And I think this is just going to give white a slight edge here. Now, Mac plays a nice move. He's not afraid of weakening the position around his king, and it's going to cause a favorable trade, I feel, for white. He plays g4. Now, the horse has only one place to go. He doesn't want to go to h6 and allow his pawn structure to get shattered. So he goes here, and then a trade. Now, b5 is the correct move. Knight to a5. And now, during the game, I was actually looking at Bishop to b7. I thought that white would stand better here, but actually it's not so. Let's take a look at this. Knight takes d4, getting the pawn back, and now pawn takes, knight c6, queen c7. I think that the position is pretty level here. Black is certainly not any worse. White's got a nice knight on c6, yes, and it controls the d8 square, yes. But black is going to get a nice knight on c5, which will control the d7 square, so neither side's going to be able to have an entry point. Mac didn't like the looks of that, so he played knight takes a5, which is certainly a logical continuation and is probably the best. Timur trades bishops, and now takes the knight. Queen takes a d4, getting a pawn back. D takes e5, and now Mac decides to trade queens. Now, you don't want to play queen takes just because of this. It's not pretty. And that happens later in the game as well. So queen takes d8. And again, you don't want to play rook takes e5 because of bishop f6. So bishop to e3. Bishop e7. c5. Now, white holds a bit of an edge and kind of a sustained initiative here. But black does look to find some counterplay along the d file. And here, Mac plays rook e to c1. Let's go back. I thought rook a to d1, contesting the d file, might have been the better idea, for example. And now, if rook a to d8, then we can trade. And here's some trickery. If rook takes d5, then c6 comes in and is very strong. Bishop d8 and a4. And the c-pawn has gained considerable weight by advancing one square. I really like white's position here. I really like it. Even though he's a pawn down, that pawn on c6 is a major threat. And the pawn on a7 is being tickled as well, and there's not an easy way to defend it. Bishop to b6, white can just trade and then bring the rook in behind the c-pawn and head into an ending. But after rook a d8 and rook to d5, e d5 is the move. And after c6, d4, bishop d2. I think white has an edge here, but I think black can defend with correct play. And going back to rook a to d1, black probably could play f6 and just look to have a solid position to play with. Yes, he still has to contend with the passed c pawn. I think black is doing okay with this. Maybe that's why Mac in this position preferred to play rook e to c1. f5 was played. It's truly a grandmaster type move. f3, and black is generating some counterplay here. Rook to d3, bishop g1, e4, a nice move. F takes e4, and now a little in-between move with rook to d2. And white pretty much has to bring his king back, and then rook a to d8. And the game was agreed drawn at this point. But once you look at it a little deeper, it's quite obvious that this is going to end up being a draw. Okay, so let's give you one variation of what could happen here. c6 is the most logical looking continuation, but after rook 8 to d3, white's in a little bit of hot water here, and I think he's going to have to bail out to a perpetual with c7, rook takes pawn check, bishop to h2, rook h takes h2, king to g1, and then black does not want to play rook to c2. That just loses because we promote with check, and if he takes, we capture with check, and king moves and we take the rook. So obviously a grandmaster is not going to play that move, and he's just going to opt to take the draw that is at hand. No way to escape the checks. So going back to here at this point where they agreed to a draw, you can see that's pretty much a forced variation. Not much white can do to get out of it. By the way, there's no way to protect that pawn. If you go rook to c3, you're in for a nasty surprise after bishop to f6. So a draw was the correct result here. Alright, so that's the result on board 1 is a draw. Let's get over and take a look at the game between Altunian and Anka on board 2. In this game, Emil Anka has white for Seattle, and Levon Altunian is playing black. And we get a king pawn opening and a Philidor defense. And again, the opening's not of great importance because it's still a lot of theory. Alright, a5 is a rather offbeat move, but it's a good move. a4. Knight to b4, see a hole, jump into it, bishop e3, bishop e6, and I think black is doing okay here. Queen to b6, knight to d2, rook a d8, f5, pushing the bishop back, knight to c4, queen to a6, and now a novelty, and it turns out to be a good one by Emil Anka. He plays knight to a3. Previously in this position, b3 had been the main move, but I think that once the chess world sees this, you're going to realize a3 is actually not such a quiet move after all. It's a weird move, undeveloping move, and putting it to the a3 square. Knights to the side with pride. Bishop c6. And the thing that we're going to notice about this is that the b5 hole is a weakness for black, and the queen being on a6 is very difficult to get out. And now another sharp move by Emil. He plays bishop h4. Emil's play has been inspired, and he holds a clear advantage here. It's time for Lev to turn on the thinking cap and figure out a way to get out of this mess. So Lev plays bishop to e7, and now knight c to b5. But this move causes some disconcern in black's camp. What does he do here? I thought that c4 was a viable move. You know, maybe even taking on e4 comes into consideration. But let's look at c4. Alright, now the idea here is if he takes, then we can go d5, similar to what occurs in the game, and e d5, knight b d5. And I think that black has managed to get equality here, or very close to it. He's a pawn down, but he's got plenty of play. So bishop f2 is probably the best shot for white here. And after rook c8, bishop d4, white is in a good position to round up that c pawn. I think black would have to grovel with something like bishop d7 to hold on to that pawn. Not a pretty picture. So that was c4, which is what I was thinking as Lev was playing the game. Knight takes e4 is the other choice. I was trying to calculate this while Lev was thinking, but this doesn't seem to work out too well either. Bishop takes e7, rook takes, and now c3. Where does that knight go? Well, double on the e-file, and now if pawn takes, knight c2, d5, and this is about as far as I could see before Lev made his move. And then you have something like knight bd4, queen to b6, and b3. Black does have two pawns for the piece, and he's got a hole on c3 that he might be able to jump into, but that bishop on c6 looks like a big fat pawn. So I'm sure he couldn't have been happy about this idea. Another idea is to take right away on b5, but here, after a b5, queen to b6, bishop f2, again holding that c pawn back. Bishop f8, queen d2, queen to c7. At least the queen's getting out of the corner. And rook a d1. I think that white is clearly better here with no real problems, but black's position, on the other hand, is a bit of a mess. d5 is going to be hard to prove. I think it will be eventually played once it's set up. Maybe he has to play b6 first. Maybe not. Maybe d5 right away, but then e5's coming in. It's a very complicated mess. In the end, Lev opted to play queen to b6. It's a very difficult position for black. Now, before the game I was teasing him he has to join the dark side, embrace the dark pieces. And here he tries to use some Jedi mind tricks. I think that's what it comes down to. Now, I think the best move for white here is obviously to play knight c4. And then you would just go back. And then I think taking on d6 seems to be playable. I think c3 here brings some interesting play because black's not got anywhere to retreat tonight, so he's got to play d5. And now if c takes b4, then I think black is better in this position, so obviously he's not going to do that. But he can take on d5, and now the knight manages to find a way to escape. But after queen to b3, I think that white is just better here. Maybe Emil didn't see queen to b3, which saves his pawn, which maybe I should have pointed out earlier. Black always had this latent threat of bishop takes on b5, pawn takes, and then queen takes b5. Now this queen comes here to protect the b5 square if a trade happens there. So yeah, this looks okay for Emil. It looks actually pretty good. But he played c3 right away. Okay, this looks forcing, but Lev has a counter shot here, and this is exactly what I'm sure he was hoping for, was to play d5. Now, a while back I lost my drug connection with Mr. Heisenberg, let's call him, and the game gets really complicated and fast here, and since I lost my connection I won't be able to keep up, but I'll try and explain what's going on here. White has several decisions he has to make here. He's got a lot of moves to look at, and they all go down pretty radical paths. In the end, he ended up playing e5, which is the best move. It makes it a very sharp struggle. But let's look at some alternatives here. He could play c takes b4. Well, this does not turn out good after pawn takes. Now the queen is hit from the rook on d1, so queen c2. Now ef3 is not a good idea because knight c4 comes in and white is winning here. But bishop takes b5 first works out fine for black. After pawn takes pawn on a5, queen takes a5, and then knight b5. Now you play pawn takes bishop, pawn takes, and queen to b4. Black is clearly better here. White's got fractured pawns all over the board. He's got 1, 2, 3 pawn islands. Black's got 2, but white's got doubled f pawns. You know, this is not an endgame I'd want to face somebody like Lev in. So we just looked at c takes b4, and what about e takes d5? This looks like a natural try. Bishop takes b5, a b5, knight b takes, bishop f2. White has a slight pull here, I think, but black is certainly alive and fighting. Now, in the game, e5 was the correct move, and Emil found that. Okay, at this point, Lev played knight to e4, and I became all confused. And I was certainly missing my little blue friend and hoping for a resurrection of Mr. Heisenberg. I thought c4 suggested itself, and I wasn't sure. You know, Lev's a much higher rated player than I, so I figured he had the right path here. Or maybe he was still using some psychological Jedi mind tricks. I'm thinking that's how most of this game went. It's almost as if he played this move and waved his hand in front of the screen saying, "You will not take on e7. The bishop on e7 is not the one you want to take." And true enough, White played f6. Let's go back, because there's a lot going on here. And let's take a look at an alternative for Lev here. I thought c4. So let's take a look at this real quickly here. King h1, knight to d3. This is the idea. Now that bishop on h4 really cannot play a big role on the king side, on black's king side, because it has to guard the f2 square. So he can take here, and we can take here, and then rook takes, and he can't take on f6. Okay, boom. And this actually leads to mate, not just the win of the queen, because that's check. You can block, and now rook comes up, and that's mate. Alright, so f6 is not the place for the bishop, but g3 is. And now knight takes b2, getting a second pawn for the piece. But I think the bishop pair weighs heavily in favor of white here. Even though black has the bishop pair, blacks are uncoordinated, whites are teamed up, and he's ready to move the queen out of the way, bring the rook to e1. Okay, there's play here for both sides, but knight to e4 could have allowed the move bishop takes e7, but remember the Jedi mind trick told him he couldn't take it. But the point here is that black is pretty much busted after rook takes e7, bishop takes e4 now. Pawn takes, okay, the queen's hit, we've seen all this before, but now knight to c4. If we go back for just a moment, if white has to move the queen, the knight comes out of trouble off of b5, black is just fine. But with this move, black can take on d1, but white doesn't have to capture on b6. That's the whole point. If knight takes b6, rook takes a1, rook takes knight to d3, black is just better here. So after rook takes d1, you just ignore that, and you play rook a takes d1. Now, why in the hell would you do this? You just gave up a queen, but you got control of the d file. But black's queen covers d8, and black has a rook or a bishop that can come to e8 if white checks on d8. However, it's not that simple. Where does black put the queen? Well, it's only one square. It's a6. Now the point here is that knight c7 not only hits the queen, it threatens the rook to d8, where white now has two pieces that would attack the e8 square. The rook would be on d8 and the knight on c7. After queen takes c4, you have rook to d8 check, bishop e8, knight takes. Now the best try to get out of this is g6, but this falls short because of this discovered check. And it's not that the queen is hit, it's that after king to g7, you got f6 check, king to h6, and you still don't take the queen. You take the rook and you're ready to promote, and it's game over for black. Well, I suppose you could probably take the queen, it would still be game over, but this is just immediately decisive. Okay, but that's not easy to see here, is it? I mean, the guys are dealing with the clock, and bishop takes e7. Okay, this looks pretty logical, but now you think you got to move the queen. And had he seen that he could sacrifice the queen, he'd have to see that he doesn't recapture here. He plays rook a takes d1. Very difficult to see in time pressure. No, this is not the bishop you want to capture. Move along. Alright, so f6 was played. Yes, Emil still has good chances here. Black is probably considered dead. Now, Emil is a pretty decent grandmaster. He's rated 2497, so he's no beginner. And these aren't beginner mistakes. Like I just showed you, that's a pretty complicated affair to try and see. And, mind you, that we are only looking at really one variation when you have to really look at a whole branch of different stuff in complicated positions. Often, strong players will just look one or two moves ahead. Go, this is good enough, this is good enough, and then move. But sometimes you have to calculate really thick and wide and deep variations, and it's not easy, especially in the faster time controls. Okay, black is hanging two pieces here, so how can this be bad? The bishop on e7 is hit, the knight on b4 is hit. It can't be bad. One of them will have to go. Just move. So Lev here plays bishop f8. A wise move. It preserves a defender on the king side, and it seems the best way to go. Again, Emil makes another mistake here. And this was an unexpected part of my trying to get Lev to embrace the dark side. I meant flow with the black pieces, Lev. Don't turn into Mikhail Tal. What happened? You're a Petrosian type player, and here you're playing like Mikhail Tal. Okay. Truth is, he can only take one piece at a time. The best move here for white would be to play bishop takes e4. I think this is the clearest way to go. Now after pawn takes, he can play queen to g4. And he's exerting some pressure on the king side now as well as on the queen side. But the knight can come to d3. But now we hit the queen. Again, not an easy move to find here. But black has the resource of knight takes e5. Wow, this is some bizarre stuff. Now, if knight takes queen on b6, we take the queen on g4, and we're out of hot water. And probably doing just fine. Now, the thing is, if white had time to sit down and evaluate all these things, f takes g7 is just absolutely a wonderful move. The best move here is to play bishop d6. You don't want him to take and promote. That's just killing. And if you take his queen, he'll take your bishop, promote, and then he'll take your queen on b6. So you don't have time to do that. Bishop d6 is the best move. And now another nice move, and very hard move to find. What would you play here if you were playing white? Alright, from the land of the bizarre, tell you what, look closely at this position. Give it some good thought. You're playing white. What would you play? Okay, the move here, actually, get back down to earth, is queen takes e4. It's such a slutty move. You gotta like something like that. An absolutely amazing move, isn't it? Amazing. Alright, so what happens if you take the queen? Bishop takes e4. Well, knight takes b6. And once again, everything is hanging for black. Material is equal right now. Actually, I think white's up a pawn. Yeah, white's up a pawn. But black's going to have to give back at least the exchange. Pretty nasty stuff after queen takes e4. And then if you play knight takes c4, so it's not hitting your queen, then simply queen takes, and now, lo and behold, a whole different set of problems. The threat is to take the bishop on d6, or to take the rook on e8 first, and then take the bishop on d6, or to take the rook on d8. And the bad news for black is that he can't, in any of those lines, if he trades on e1 first, he still can't play rook to d7 to maintain contact with his bishop, because rook e8 is then available because the bishop on c6 is no longer protecting the e8 square. And I'm sure mate can be found in there soon by white. Pretty nasty position, though. Queen takes e4 in this position. Who would have thunk it? I mean, absolutely amazing. Now, truly a computer move, no doubt. And no human's really going to see that. But I just thought it'd be interesting to show you that the tactics in the position are there. If the players had more time, yeah, maybe he could have seen something like that. But here they are playing, I think it was a game in 75 with a 30-second increment. Not easy to do. Alright, so let's get on with the game here. King h1 was played. Rook takes e5. Now c takes b4. But white could have maintained a slight edge with bishop takes e4. Rook takes, pawn takes. Rook takes h4. Take the bishop, promote to a queen or rook. Something that will force him to take. Now pawn takes knight. And queen to d2. Now the threat here is queen to g5, check, and then pick up the rook. So black has to deal with that, queen to d8. And now the knight can escape its pressure. Again, black has 2 pawns for the piece. It's going to be something similar to what we have in the game. A little bit of an edge for white. In the game, he played pawn takes knight right away. Pawn takes, and then bishop takes e4. Alright, a slight nuance here that white could have played is a very interesting move is a5. And if queen to a6, then knight to c7 obviously isn't going to be as good as black would like, because we can have this knight come in, we're hitting the queen, and now bishop takes e4. And his ticket has been punched, because if he plays rook takes e4, rook takes e4, pawn takes e4, queen takes d8, the knight on c7 is blocking the defense of the rook. Alright, so after a5, black pretty much has to take right away. And now we get knight to c4. D takes c4, believe it or not, is probably the best shot. If queen takes b5, then we get knight takes e5, knight takes f6. Black has 4 pawns for the rook, but another computer move, bishop to h5, keeps the pressure on. And if you watch my videos, I give you at least one position during the whole video that's worthy of setting up on your board and studying. You can check out the blog, the PGN viewer, and find this position on there as well, or write it down and study this from the white side, and you'll find that black is busted. His king side is going to be torn asunder in just a few moves, and white's going to penetrate and win. But here, instead of queen takes b5, if d takes c4, like I said, this might be the best shot. Rook takes queen, rook takes queen, rook takes now g5, trying to push that aggressive bishop back. Bishop g3, knight takes, pawn takes, b6. What a certainly odd position we have here on the board. Black has a bishop and 3 pawns for a rook and a knight. Okay, now rook a7, and he picks up the knight. So now he has a piece and 3 pawns for the rook. All looks hunky-dory for black, right? Wrong. Bishop h5. We got pressure on f7, so now bishop e8 seems to hold until you spot rook to d8, and it's all over. Black loses back some material here. Rook f5, rook takes e8, rook takes f6, rook a to a8, and it's all over. The bishop on f8 is lost. Stupid bishop. So a5 was a little nuance that really threw a big monkey wrench into black's plans. But it's hard to see all this. Like I said, game in 75, it's not easy. Bishop takes e4 was played in the game. Rook takes, pawn takes on g7. Alright, this looks like it's a winning line for white, but it turns out to be an illusion. After rook takes h4, he takes on f8, queen. It's a pretty picture. For a brief moment, white has 2 queens on the board. Now, if rook takes f8, queen to d2, queen to d8, looks like black is holding here. And king takes f8 was played. And this is a real gamble. But I think it was played with the realization that it is a gamble. And white misses it. If you were to play white here, what would you play? Find a move for white. Okay, a5 again. It worked before. Why not try it now? If this is your move, congratulations, you're a genius. But the motif is a little bit different than before. After queen takes a5, now what would you play? Okay, queen to f3 is a move. If you said knight c4, it's a noble try, but it just doesn't work because queen takes b5. Knight e5 and bishop e8 seems to defend everything. I think black can survive here. But after queen f3, a b3, how can this be bad? Queen f6, uh-oh, rooks are forked. Rook to e4, queen's protecting the one on d8, it's a fortunate thing. But now, rook to f1, threatening mate on f7, bishop e8 defends, and now knight c3 gets that loose knight out of the way. And here black is up 3 pawns, but he's completely lost. Completely lost. Okay, so you actually have 2 positions from this game that you can write down or go to the PGN viewer and find a position and play them out as white. It'll be good practice. Black is completely lost even though he's up 3 pawns. In the game, Emil didn't see that, or maybe he saw the part where there are 3 pawns. So we're looking from here to a position many moves down the road to this. Can you see that from here? Yeah, it's not easy. Instead, Emil decided to save the knight. Knight c2. Now d4. All of a sudden, black's got pressure on white's king side. Now, rook f1 would probably lead to an equal game. But again, Lev is using his Jedi mind tricks, and white plays queen to e2. White's not sensing any danger here. Lev plays rook to e8, and I thought he was going to play bishop to e4. And in principle, in just general ideas, I thought this was a very strong move. It contains the threat of queen to h6. Also, the threat of d3 is on the board. It blocks queen to e7 check by white. It just seemed like a good move on principle. But it turns out this move is just completely winning. For example, if rook to f1, we can play d3 right away, queen f2, and now bishop takes g2, check. Now this is the underlying feature that I think eluded Lev during the time pressure he was dealing with. King takes g2, queen to g6, king to h1, queen to e4, queen to g2, d takes c2, rook ac1, queen takes queen, king takes, and now b3, and I think black should win here. He's got 3 pawns now for the piece, plus he's got a pawn on c2. I'm sure white would not be happy here. He's also threatening rook to d2 check and picking up the h pawn as well. It's just a miserable game for white. And if queen to f2, then we have queen to h6, as I mentioned. Now white cannot play h3 because of the pin on the pawn, and that's just mate. So queen to g3 is forced. Now we have rook to d5. And white can resign in this position. He can throw in a spite check on b8, but that's about it. The threat here is rook takes h2 and then rook to h5, or rook to h5 right away, just dogpiling. Very unfortunate position for white. He probably has to give up the exchange here and play rook takes e4 to try and have any hope of saving the game, but that's futile as well. Alright, so time pressure brings about ugly moves by both sides. Lev played rook to e8, queen to f2, and now Lev plays rook to g4. I thought rook h to e4 was an interesting alternative. Maybe white's a little better here, I don't know. Rook to g4 was played. Rook takes rook, bishop takes. Now knight to e1. Queen f5 might have been worth a shot here. Rook to g6, rook f1. Queen c6, knight to e1. Now white has survived the attack on his king, but it doesn't seem like he has much more than that. Black has 2 pawns for the piece, and they're active pawns. I think black is okay here. Knight to e1 was played in the game. Queen h6, knight f3, defending the h2 pawn, bishop c6. Rook f1, rook f4. queen g3, queen f6. Black is looking to wreck the pawn structure on the king side here. After h3, d3, queen f2, b6, just solidifying, queen to e3. Now Lev goes to wreck the pawns, and rook to h4. Now I think both players probably had a draw on their minds at this point, but they played on for a bit. f4, c4, rook f2, queen f5, king h2, rook h6. Now I think that Lev probably could have forced the draw right here with d2. Rook takes d2, rook takes h3, queen takes h3, queen takes f4, king g1, queen takes d2, queen c8, and then I think white has to just go in, hunting down the black king with a perpetual. I don't think he can bring the knight in time. If he brings the knight in, then black is probably going to be the one to force perpetual. It looks like a draw here. Now I'm pretty sure that Lev had considered this line, so that shows you his fighting spirit here. He plays rook to h6. Who knows? White may play... he should have played rook to h4, tempt him with taking that pawn on b6, and then he would force mate in 2. But rook h6, anyhow, it's showing his fighting spirit. Though Lev is definitely showing his fighting spirit, he's also tempting disaster here. White is up a piece for 2 pawns. However, it's not so easy for white, but if anybody has a chance to win here, it's white. But you got to credit the guy. He keeps on fighting. And it's probably also a difficult thing of who should offer the draw here. I think it would not have been unreasonable for Lev to offer the draw, but technically, being the person down in material, that's poor form, or it's considered poor form to offer the draw when you are in the quote-unquote inferior position. Which is kind of a stupid rule, because if you think you're equal, you think you're equal. Rook to d6 was played, now knight to b5, rook to e6, queen to f2, rook to e4. Black still is managing to improve his pieces bit by bit. Now king to g3, and someone, I'm assuming that Emil, offered the draw, and they agreed to stop the game here and split the point. Truly a crazy, crazy game. Lots of tactics hiding underneath and lots of tactics right on the surface. It was definitely one of the most exciting games when you start to scratch below the surface a little bit that I've seen all year. Alright, let's go on to board 3 and see how Robbie Adamson is doing. In this game we have IM-elect Robbie Adamson playing white, and he is taking on Tian Sang, who is a FIDE master at 23-24. Robbie comes up with a slow opening Italian game, but it's becoming more and more acceptable these days. And Robbie chooses knight a3, which is not the most common move, but it's playable, definitely. Now Robbie plays a novelty here, bishop to d5. Knight c2 is a more popular move, and it is the move preferred by the computer, but it has not been played, as far as I know, at any higher levels. Bishop b3 has also been seen, and after a6, knight c4, bishop a7, and knight to e3 with an equal game. It's really all white wants to get out of this is an equal game. He wants a little more space and a little bit better piece mobility than black has. To say black is at a disadvantage, in the purest sense of the term, no, but in a practical sense, for over-the-board play, yes, I think white stands a little better in such positions. But Robbie here played bishop to d5. Now, black should have traded on g4. He did not. He played rook to e8. Let's just look at this line for future reference. And now, bishop takes c6, bc6. White is floundering a bit here, and he needs to try e5. And after de5, rook e5, bishop e6, knight takes d4, rook a d8. Play seems pretty level, but black has started to get some scope for his pieces in this line. So after e takes d4, white should try c takes d4, but now I think knight to b4 is the most testing line of white's play. It doesn't exactly refute it, but black starts to get a little bit of play here. Rook to e8 was played in the game. Nothing seriously wrong with it. And Robbie goes ahead and trades to force the weakness on the queen side, and now d takes e5. And he's managed to give black isolated c-pawns and an isolated a-pawn. However, black does have a bishop pair out of this deal, and I don't think black stands any worse due to that fact. But Robbie keeps his cool in this game. He plays queen a4, which I thought he would. Bishop b7, knight to c4, queen c5, and knight to e3. I think white has a decent position here. If he can get into the endgame, I definitely would prefer white. But in the middle game here, it looks like black has some opportunities with the bishop pair. Rook a d8 was played. Now queen to c4. Maybe c4 was a better move, but okay. Goes for the queen trade, like I said, trying to get to the endgame. Tian plays bishop a6. c5 was an interesting idea, hitting a pawn on e4. And white is going to either have to grovel and play knight to d2 in defense, or play knight takes e5, knight takes e4, a4, a5, and bishop f4. It looks pretty equal. Maybe white's a tiny bit better, but black certainly has play. The problem for black here is one of these two bishops is going to end up being bad for a while. Either the bishop on b7 or the bishop on b6. Right now, the bishop on b6 is just a big fat pawn. Bishop a6, trying to get both bishops active. A logical choice. Knight takes e5, bishop to e3. And here I think that Emil should have traded on e3. He played f5. Let's take a step back and look at that. Bishop takes e3, rook takes, knight to d2, knight takes c6, knight takes f3. Now I think white should take with pawn here. Rook takes, f takes, and rook to d2. This is unclear. White could play maybe b4 and take on a7. It's just not so clear because black has become active. Well, in the game I had played f5, and now knight takes c6, winning a pawn, rook d6, but for the cost of the pawn, white's getting a lot of development. Bishop takes b6. You're up in material, you're up in pawns, you want to trade pieces, that's the basic rule, and it's logical. A b6, but the pawns get straightened out to a degree here. Now, knight c to d4 was played. I thought a little better would have been the other knight coming to d4, and then if bishop back, knight to a7. White's trying to put the screws down on the queen side, so if he can start moving his pawns up, he has a better chance of making a passer. Rook to a8 is the best defense. Knight a b5, rook to d7, and now not knight takes f5 because rook f8 is just going to get the pawn back. So f3, knight g3, king h2, knight h5, and then a4. I think white's a little better here. He's getting ready to start mobilizing the pawns on the queen side and make something happen there. But Robbie's patient. He has plenty of time on the clock. And he plays knight cd4, g6, a4, king f8, knight to b5. And now black trades because this cripples white's queenside pawns a bit. Knight c5, rook takes e8, king takes e8. Now when I was looking at this, I was thinking that white should play rook to a8, check, try and infiltrate from behind and harass the pawns, but black just simply would play king to f7. So Robbie made the wise move here, rook to e1, check. Now black has a decision. Do you move the king to the king side or the center on d7? He opted for king f7, knight to d4, knight to e6. Alright, difficult decision to make here. Can you win the king and pawn ending? Because you have to calculate all this out. And I believe Robbie took a while on this move. The trade-off here with trading all the material is that black, in truth, has a way to defend this ending. If white didn't have the doubled b-pawns, white would have very good winning chances. Knight f3 was played, king f6, knight to e5, knight f4, king f1, rook to d5, and now Robbie opts to give the pawn back with knight to c4, rook takes b5, so that he can get more active pieces. He plays h4, rook to d5, g3, knight to e6, king to e2, centralizing the king, b5, knight to e3, rook to d6, rook to a1, h5, rook to a7, and now black should continue here with f4. He did not, but let's take a look at that. And after knight f1, rook to d5, black's got everything defended. In the game he played king to e5, and this actually allows white to win a pawn back. He plays rook to a5, a sharp move. And I think what had happened here is he realized too late that c6 does not defend that pawn because of knight to c4, forking the king and the rook, and the pawn on b5 is pinned. So he had to play king f6, and white just scarfed up the pawn. Okay, white is back on the path of trying to trade the pieces off, get into a simplified ending. c6 was played, rook to b6, knight c5, knight c2, rook to e6 check, king to f1, knight to d7. Robbie could play rook to b7 here, but he played rook to a6, and then knight to c5, rook to b6, knight to d7, and now rook to b7. He's managed to gain a whole minute on the clock because of that maneuver. Knight c5, and rook to c7. The idea is when you're in a better position in an endgame, you often want to repeat moves because it frustrates your opponent. Also, in this case, for the game in 75 with a 30-second increment, he gained a full minute. Knight to d3, b4. F4 is a good try to stay in the game, but he plays g5, which turns out to be a pretty major mistake after pawn takes, king takes. Knight to d4 is a good shot here. Robbie played rook to d7, hitting the knight first. Knight to b2, and now he plays knight to d4. Black should play rook to g6 here, but it's still over after rook to f7, rook to d6, and we can take with check, king to g6, and rook to a5. White's clearly winning here. Or, in the game, he played rook to h6, rook to g7, king to f6, rook to c7, king to e5. A nice move here that Robbie could have played. He didn't find it. He didn't need to. It's an easy win anyway. But b5 is a very good move here. And the point here is if c takes b5, then we have rook check, king f6, rook check. King has to protect the rook. Well, actually, if he does protect the rook, he gets mated or he loses more material. If he goes here, we simply fork. So king to g5, but here he gets mated. Knight f3, king comes up, we go check again. He can go back, but this would allow mate. So king to h3, rook takes rook, b4, and rook takes pawn is mate. Pretty fun stuff. So after b5, he can't really take. He can try rook to h8, but now we can play pawn takes, knight c4, rook e7 check, king comes over, rook to d7, king comes up, and then we go here. He has to go here. We can go here. He has to go here. And now we just simply win by scarfing up 2 pawns on the king side. Very easy win for white. Robbie's way is pretty simple too. I mean, you're up a pawn in an endgame, and your opponent has a bunch of weak pawns. It's pretty easy to win. King to d5, knight takes f5, getting another pawn. Rook f6, knight to e3 is check. King to d6, rook to h7, hitting another pawn. Knight to d3, f4, c5. You know, black's just showing desperation here. Rook takes h5, king to c6, rook to d5, and now he tries knight takes f4, and that just truly doesn't work after rook takes d5. The knight's going to fall, and white's also 3 pawns up as the position stands right now, so black resigned at this point. Nice game by Robbie. First victory for him of the year. Unfortunate, though, because in his other 2 games, he definitely had chances. Just time pressure and the complicated positions that came up didn't work out well for him. So he took a simple approach in this game and ended up winning without ever being in danger. Pretty nice. Congratulations, Robbie. Alright, on to our final game, board 4, where we have Megan Lee for Seattle against Amanda Mateer. Megan starts out the game with e4, and we get a Sicilian con. And we're not going to discuss the opening in too much detail here. Pretty standard stuff. Now, bishop e3 is the positional line for white, and the move that Megan plays is the aggressive all-or-nothing approach. Rook e8. In practice, this move has not been successful for black, but it is logical, and it is the move that I would prefer. Previously seen in this position were d5, and knight to d7 may be the best try. Yeah, I think knight to d7 is probably the idea to go after. But rook e8 is perfectly playable. g5, knight to d7, and now f5 is a novelty. Queen to h5 had been seen here. Also rook f3 has been seen. But f5 is played in our game, and now knight d to e5. Amanda has no fear of the Space Invaders coming down on her kingside. She's a brave lady. I would have followed more in the tradition of brave Sir Robin from Monty Python's Holy Grail and played the defensive queen to d8 instead. Okay, so she now has to deal with f6. Bishop f8, and f takes g7, bishop takes. King to h1. Amanda started queenside operations, which is pretty typical here. b5, knight to e2. Okay, this knight would like to come around like so to g3, h5, and to help support operations on the f6 square. Amanda doesn't worry about that and plays knight to c4. Knight to g3, pressing on. Knight takes b2, getting a pawn, but this is really going out on an edge. Queen to e2, knight to c4. I think that white could have continued with knight h5 here. She did not, but let's take a look. And now I think the knight coming to f6 will have pretty little impact. So knight to d4, rook f8, a4, pawn takes, knight takes g7, king takes, and now rook a3. And I'm not sure if white has anything here. White's down 2 pawns. You know, of course, one of those a pawns is surely to fall back. But I don't think that white really has any concrete inroads. The knight on e5 can always come back to g6 to help defend if needed. Yeah, it's not clear that white has anything here. So that's probably why Megan opted for rook a d1 here. Now knight takes, queen takes, and knight to e5. And now white shies away from taking the pawn on d6 and plays knight h5. Let's go back. Queen takes d6, queen takes, rook takes, bishop f8. And the material is equal, but white has absolutely no attack and very weak pawns all across the board. So knight h5 is played, and then bishop b7, knight a5, knight to c4. Rook a c8 might have been more testing, but okay, knight takes c4, and now Amanda really has to take with the pawn here. She plays queen takes, and Megan misses a good move here. She plays knight takes g7, a logical looking move, but a good place to pause and see what you would play if you were playing white here. Take a moment, ponder the situation. What would you do? Queen f4 is the move. We have deadly threats on f7 and queen takes g7 mate right away, so have to deal with it. 2 moves to defend here. There's rook f8, and then there's e5. Let's take a look at rook f8. Now we got rook takes d6. White has invested 0 for this attack. It would be totally screwball for black to play queen takes a2 or queen takes c2. That just allows rook to d7. White's got a good attack for nothing. The best defense here is with e5, but even this comes up short after queen to h4, switching gears, going the other direction. Bishop c8, knight takes g7, king takes, rook f6. The threat is queen h6, or rook h6, or rook f1, or rook takes d6. Bishop e6 stops one idea. Rook df1. Now the problem for Amanda would have been she would have to find these defensive moves rather quickly in a limited time on her clock, so it's not sure if she would have found all this. Black is holding the position by the skin of her teeth, not by much. Still, you would have to say that white is better. White has the initiative and the attack. Black is running out of good options here. But back here at move 26, Megan played knight takes bishop, king takes, queen takes d6. Okay, so material is equal now. And then Amanda makes a blunder here. She plays rook a to d8. She should have played rook e d8. And the point here is queen f4 in this position doesn't offer anything anymore because a rook takes d1. Queen takes f7, king h8, rook takes d1, and the rook on a8 is guarding the back rank. A nice luxury. Bishop takes e4 is just dead level. The best shot after rook e to d8 is queen to e5 check, and now king to g8, rook to d3, rook a c8, and this seems to hold the balance. Okay, so now let's go back to the game and look at Amanda's move and see why this does not work. Again, white to play and to win. I hope you pause this and take a look because these are good puzzles. There's a problem with the rooks on e8 and d8. And if you found the correct move, which is queen to f4, congratulations. Queen to e5 is not the move, and that's what Megan played in the game. But queen to f4, we got heavy pressure on f7. What does black do here? There's a few choices. There's e5 to defend like we looked at before, rook takes d1, or queen to c8. Let's look at queen to c8 first. Looks like this might work. It helps to protect the rook on d8, which we'll see is important. White just continues with queen f6, king to g8, queen f7, king h8, and now white has g6. This just crashes through. And if pawn takes, then white can play rook to d3. The idea is to come over and mate on h3, so it has to be taken. Pawn takes. And now black needs to try and find some kind of defense on the king side, and there's really nothing there. Because after rook f4, we're threatening to come over and mate on h4. So queen at c1, bishop f1, and it's all over for black. She'll have to give up her queen for the rook or something to hold off mate, and that's just a dead loss. Alright, so queen c8 doesn't work. The other idea is rook takes d1. Now we have queen takes f7 check, king h8, and now we see the problem here. If the rooks were lined up on d8 and c8, this wouldn't be possible. But now there's takes with check and mate. Doesn't work. e5 is the only other try. This runs into queen f6 check, king to g8, and now rook takes on d8. And you can see the rook is protected by the queen, so black just lost a rook. An easy win. So yeah, queen f4. Decisive blow. Queen e5 was played in the game, king to g8, and Amanda can breathe a big sigh of relief that she's not getting mated or losing a rook. Queen f6, and now she can defend with queen to c7. Rook d to e1, logical choice to try and not trade off material to bring the rook up to e3 to h3 and try and win in a caveman or cavewoman type fashion, if you will. Rook to d2, putting a stop to that plan. Rook to e3 was played, and now rook takes c2. Rook to g3. This is just too slow because black has rook to c1 here. Rook to h3. Rook takes f1. Queen takes f1. Rook to d8. Rook to e3. White is very short of time, so she's just trying to hold everything together. Now h4. Rook takes a2. Now Amanda is up 2 pawns, and they're past queenside pawns. So if she can manage to trade some material off, the victory is going to be hers. Queen to d1. Rook c2. Threatens rook to c1. Queen f1. b4. h5. Rook to c1. Rook to e1. Rook takes. Queen takes b3. Queen a1. Queen c2. Queen e5 and b2. at this point. Megan resigned. Amanda wins in nice fashion here, but she dodged some bullets. Some big bullets. She dodged some missiles. Arizona ends up winning this match 3-1. A nice victory and a good way to close out the season. However, LA was able to score a victory against San Francisco, which just puts them out of reach of Arizona, just by a tiny bit. Arizona had a bad season this year. They started off slow. They missed some chances. A lot of criticism falls on board 3, and I got to agree. I think that was a downfall for Arizona, was board 3 this year. I don't mean to poke at anybody that was playing on board 3. Okay, we know that in 2 games, Robbie had chances to win. Time pressure just kept them from finding the right path. Some complicated games. When he simplified and played simple chess, he won a nice game in this week's matchup. Amanda on board 4 had some lucky situations occur for her, but she still came out with a respectable score over the year. Ben, I can't remember. I think Ben had a draw and a loss. And then Brian, I think, had 2 losses. So board 4 could have done a little better. Board 3, definitely we'd want to see a few more points off of board 3. Board 2 was pretty solid when Lev was playing. And indeed, when Sakin was playing board 2, he was okay as well. Max here was okay. He played the top board, and it's always a tough battle. In round 1, he drew against Cosiano, who had white for Seattle. That was a draw. In week 2, he had a draw against Jesse Cry, who's San Francisco. In week 3, he lost to Conrad Holt. That was the down point of his season this year. He managed to draw against Robert Hungoski of Manhattan in week 4. And in week 5, he had a draw against Kachin. In week 6, he had a draw against Akobian. Week 7, he had a loss to Michael Rode. Yeah, I remember that. Okay. Yay for the old guys. Sorry, Mac. In week 8, Mohan Desi played board 1, so Mac didn't play. He was playing in the Spice Cup. And in week 9, we just saw that he had a draw against Timur Garev. So, yeah, 2 losses are unfortunate. Well, all right. Board 2 was pretty solid. We had Lev on there. Board 3, we need to improve. Board 4, it is always going to be up in the air. I think Amanda's pretty solid, though. She got a couple points that maybe she shouldn't have this year, but that's the way it goes. That's the USCL. All right, next up for the Scorpions will be the LA Vibe. And since they're not in contention for the championship, there is no reason to go the extra mile and try and win. Of course, they're going to do the best they can, but nothing's on the table for them, so they can feel free to have some fun. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, good luck.